What's going on, guys? Hope you're having a good night. Friday evening, we're heading into the weekend. Another weekend with no football. It's kind of a weird feeling, but honestly, I'm not upset about getting a bit of a break from the in-season grind. So I'm okay with it. I'm just gonna relax a little bit. What's up, Frailster in the chat? Says, yo, that one candy bar with the Pokeball. Welcome in, guys. Guess you're the first to arrive. We've got a few interesting topics for tonight. I am going to be answering a few questions that were dropped in the Discord, and then we're going to go over a pretty big rebuild that I did with an orphan team over the last few seasons. Kind of talk about how that went and some of my takeaways from it, looking back on it after it's finished. HM, good evening. All right, well, we're going to start with your question first, actually. So we'll jump into that one. By way of since I've been updating you guys or talking about books recently, I might as well update you and say I'm reading Harry Potter again for the first time since I was like 10 years old, and I'm having a lot of fun. Great book series. Definitely recommend it to anyone and everyone. If you want to build a reading habit, pick that one up. Anyway, HM asked in the Discord, how much should I gain to trade back in rookie drafts? For example, I have a guy who is asking me to trade up from the 1-6 to my 1-4. How much should something like that cost? So trading back in rookie drafts, first of all, I got to give the caveat. It's obviously going to depend on where you're trading back from, how far you're trading back, and then where are the tier breaks in the class. And that's the one piece of the puzzle that we don't really have so far. We know there's a tier break after 101, and then we're not really so sure. We can speculate based on projected draft capital, but we don't really know how it's all going to shake out until it actually happens, until we get the draft. So in a situation like this, where it's pretty early in the draft, right, from 4 to 6, it's only 2 spots, but it's early enough in the draft where I would be a little bit worried that you could end up hitting a tier break here, where you get kind of screwed, right? There's a scenario where we end up with like a big 4 in this draft class. Let's say we get Genty 101, and then we get McMillan is a top 10 pick. Hunter is also a top 10 pick, and he's going to be a full-time wide receiver. And then we get like another running back goes in the first round, right? We get like Amari and Hampton goes in the 20s to the Vikings in the first round. And then all of a sudden he becomes like this clear 104 where he's a smash pick, and you traded back from 4 to 6 and you got a couple of thirds on top. You're not going to feel good about that when the tier break ends up being at 4. So I think when you're making this type of move early, I think you have to consider the risk reward, and I'd probably need what would be considered an overpay if I'm going to be moving back from an early pick. I just think there's risk involved there. Now, I don't actually know what an overpay is because I don't know what the market value is of a trade back like that. There's probably not an established market value. It's going to vary from league to league. In that specific case, I'd be looking for like mid-second value. You know, if you tell me I can trade back 2 spots and maybe I get James Conner or something like that as a guy that I can use, maybe I'm thin at running back, and so I'm going to roll the dice on getting a comparable player at 6, and I'm going to pick up a running back. I don't know how many people are willing to do that, especially right now when you don't know what player you're getting at that pick. But that's probably where it would be for me. I wouldn't want to be risking missing out on a higher end player for anything less than that, I think. Now, one place I'd be comfortable moving back from, I think, is the 112. I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure there's any prospects that are really going to excite me there. Just thinking about best case scenario, there's things that can happen that we don't expect. Michael Penix being a top 10 pick last year was not something that was on my bingo card. But I would say the 112 right now seems like an undesirable spot to be. And I would rather trade back out of the first into the early second, where I think people do put a premium on that first round pick, it being a first round pick, where you could potentially get something nice on top to move down to like a 203, 204, something like that. But anyway, that's my general thoughts on the trade backs. You can feel free to ask follow-up questions, but that's how I view it at the moment. I really don't know, Nate. I don't know if we're going to find out any clarity about his position and how much he's going to play offense before it comes time to do rookie drafts. I think it's going to be very difficult to navigate. I think people are going to probably take him earlier than I'm comfortable rolling the dice. But it'll be interesting to see for sure. Another question. Let's see. Another question's coming from AJ, the Beast, Austin, who I haven't seen in here yet. Hopefully he turns up sometime soon. He was the one who asked me if we were doing this. So hopefully he's here. He had a trade offer that I'm not going to put on screen, but I'll read it out. He would be sending Garrett Wilson and 2026 second for Bucky Irving and a 2026 third. So sending Wilson and a second, getting Bucky and a third. I don't love this trade. I'll explain why in a second. Nate, why don't you tell me what you're talking about here? Matt Harmon dropped a bomb. A bomb on what? Let me know what we're talking about here. I don't actually know how much the stream delay is, so maybe I should have just kept talking. I'm just going to keep talking. I'll come back to your comment. So what he said is basically in this Garrett Wilson for Bucky Irving trade, his context is that he's really strong at wide receiver. He also has Brian Thomas, Marvin Harrison, Nico Collins, Ladd McConkey, Rashee Rice, along with Garrett Wilson, which obviously that is super duper stacked at wide receiver. He only has Taylor and ETN at running back. So he really clearly needs a running back. And that's why he's interested in making this deal. He projects the 2026 third to be early and the second to be late. So he's thinking this is a minimal pick swap and I get the running back rather than the wide receiver. So that's the logic. And I understand the logic of it. That being said, when we're talking about assets of this caliber, I'm never really going to care about the context of a positional need, right? Because there's a million ways you can get a running back. There's a ton of ways you can address that. You don't have to address running back by trading for Bucky Irving. That's not the only way to get a running back. So when I'm looking at Garrett Wilson and Bucky Irving, I've got these guys in the same tier. I have Wilson a few spots ahead of him. And if that's the case for me, like if obviously you're welcome to value players differently than I do, but if I value two players basically the same, I'm definitely not swapping them and doing a second, third round pick swap, especially when I'm sending away the player that I actually technically value higher. So regardless of where I think the picks are going to land, regardless of whether I need a running back over a wide receiver, I'm just not making this trade because, again, I think you can go out and address this running back need in a myriad of ways, and this just feels a little bit too desperate. Now, that being said, I do want to talk about Garrett Wilson a little bit because his value in Dynasty is a bit of a conundrum. And so while like I said, I'm not really interested in this trade, I'm not opposed to the idea of selling Garrett Wilson, even trying to use him in a trade to get a running back. I just, JJ Zacharyson had him as a sell in his podcast the other week. The one that I sent, I think I sent in the chat because he had three guys on his podcast that I had already put in my video. He had Terry McLaurin, James Cook, and Tucker Kraft as sells. And I thought that was funny because I already had those guys as sells in my video. But one guy he had that I hadn't really considered was Garrett Wilson as a sell. And if you haven't listened to that show, basically what he says, he thinks he's a dynasty sell just because he doesn't see him as a player that's likely to rise in value during the 2025 season. And the reason for that is basically due to the Jets' situational ambiguity, right? They don't have a quarterback solution. It's very unlikely that they're going to land a top tier quarterback upgrade because there really aren't any on the open market. The best free agent quarterback is Sam Darnold. I don't think he's going back to the Jets. And even if he did, I don't think that would be a very happy reunion. Justin Fields would certainly not be a good fit for any fantasy wide receiver. They're not getting one of the early quarterbacks, I don't think. So it's like, how are things going to get better for Wilson? And then you look at what he's done through his his 3 seasons in the league. He's never topped 15 points per game. He's never topped even 2 yards per out run, which is pretty crazy for a guy that we view this highly. And then you think about the quarterback situation. Yeah, it certainly wasn't ideal last year, but at the same time, the Jets ranked 5th in pass attempts per game, and Garrett Wilson ran the 4th most routes in the NFL. He ran the 4th most routes. So it's like there was opportunity there. The quarterback play obviously wasn't efficient, but it's just hard to see how he's going to finally break out and give us this big season that we've been waiting for. So I think that there is some concern there. I definitely don't think he's like a massive sell. Like I have him valued where I have him valued. I have him ranked right alongside Marvin Harrison, Jackson Smith-Njigba, the 102. I'm very high on him as a talent, but I do think if you're trying to think a little deeper than just, is this a good player or not? And you want to think about how can his situation change? What is he going to provide for my team this year? And how likely is he to become a premium asset in Dynasty? I think at this point, it's pretty unlikely that he's going to vault himself up into that top 5 conversation. He just doesn't have any way to do it. Like last year, 153 targets for him. That's awesome. He was like wide receiver 29 in points per game. So it's just really tough to see how it's going to work out. Now, look, Devontae Adams is going to get cut probably if the Jets don't bring in any significant additions at wide receiver, and then they go out and sign like Jameis Winston, then I'm probably going to look stupid because he's gonna go crazy. But I do think JJ has a point there. So Freelster says Garrett Wilson doesn't have a ton of downside risk. Look at how Waddle's value has held through the last 2 seasons. Yeah, I don't think Garrett Wilson's a risky asset at all. I do think he's probably more likely to lose value than gain value, simply because, again, he's valued pretty highly still. He's like a 3rd round startup pick. He is going into, I believe, his age 25 season. So if you think if Garrett Wilson turns in another season like this one, which was not even that bad of a season, overall, 153 targets, he had over 1,000 receiving yards. If he provides another similar season and then he's 26 next year, is he going to go up in value? Absolutely not. He's going to fall another round or so. What does he have to do to gain value? He's going to have to actually break into like that top 16 scoring wide receiver. So that's a pretty significant ask, I think. He's certainly not being drafted that way in early best ball drafts. He's being drafted as like a 3-4 turn pick. He's like wide receiver 20 something. So again, I do think there's a good argument for pivoting. He is going later than Jackson Smith-Njigba in those early best ball drafts. So I don't think he's that risky. I don't think he has a ton of downside. I just don't know if he has a lot of scoring upside, and because of that, I don't think he has a lot of value upside. So he's a player he's a player I could see going out and buying early in the season on rebuilding teams, right? If he comes out and he's struggling again, you could go out and buy him and say, this is the year the Jets are finally going to bottom out. They're going to get a quarterback. Garrett Wilson's going to be fine. But I just don't think right now is the time necessarily that I'd want to be buying him. I'll probably be shopping him in my leagues. Again, I'm not desperate to move him, but I'd be shopping him and just seeing where can I pivot to an asset that I value similarly, that I think either has higher upside to accrue value or higher point scoring potential for me. So that's where I would see it. In the episode, JJ sort of suggests that Chris Olave is kind of an arbitrage off of Garrett Wilson. They have had very similar peripheral numbers throughout their careers. The big exception would just be this past season with Chris Olave having these partial games where he left early with the concussions. He's actually been more efficient on a per out basis. His yards per out run has consistently been higher. Obviously, the Saints situation isn't much better, but Chris Olave is considerably cheaper than Garrett Wilson in Dynasty right now. So I could absolutely see, if you want to make a bet on talent, a talented wide receiver in a bad situation, I could see betting on Olave rather than Wilson. And I'm curious what you could get in a trade down from Wilson for Olave plus, but I'm not sure. All right. The next question came in from Durham Dave. Actually, this is the last question that we have, and then I'm going to talk about my rebuild for a bit. It'll probably take a while. But Durham Dave asked, I'm in a dynasty league where several managers rely heavily on the Keep Trade Cut trade calculator for evaluating trades. Any thoughts as to how I can strategically use their dependence on KTC values to create favorable trade opportunities? Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind for me is the value adjustment that Keep Trade Cut does in deals that have multiple assets on one side. You can really game the system when you're doing trades with like 3, 4, 5 assets on one side. So if they're really holding to the values that closely, you can try to get trades done for high-end players where you're giving up 3 or 4 or 5 assets, none of which are particularly impactful in their own right. You know, trading 5 seconds for a star player, something like that. I don't know if anybody's dumb enough to fall for that, but that's where the first place I went. The next thing you can think about is Keep Trade Cut is very reactionary when there is big news, when there's an injury or a new signing, something happens. Typically you see overcorrections and then things even out. But in the immediate aftermath of these big events happening, like when Rashee Rice got hurt or like a few years ago when Kyler Murray tore his ACL, you see these massive overcorrections in value that then sort of level out. I would say that's a time that you want to be firing off trades. If something bad happens to a player and their value just craters unrealistically, unnecessarily, I would go out and send offers for that player. If a player has something good happen and their value overcorrects, like Jalen McMillan, was probably through the roof late in the season and now he's probably tailed off a little bit, that's when you can pounce and you can go out and get your profit on a player because it does swing pretty wildly. It's pretty reactionary. So those would be 2 thoughts there. And then Frielster threw out a note here about running backs being overvalued. That's definitely true in season for sure. Like Derrick Henry got himself up to like a top 30 overall asset on Keep Trade Cut during the season. So if you're thinking about using this in season, players that are scoring a lot of points, even really old players, are going to be valued insanely high because people that click over to the site are just going to think of the immediate context of those players a lot of the time. And it's like, would I rather have Derrick Henry who's scoring a bunch of points, or would I rather have this young running back who's, I bet people were picking Derrick Henry over Kenneth Walker all through November and December. And it's like, that's a ridiculous dynasty. That'll be a ridiculous dynasty take, in my opinion, to prefer Derrick Henry. It's very short-sighted. So yeah, I think you can capitalize on in-season production, running backs being overvalued, overloading one side of a trade to try to get a star player. Those would be some of my thoughts on how you can manipulate the Keep Trade Cut trade calculator. I wish I played in leagues with people that were that were playing like that, to be honest. All right. So that's really everything you guys wanted to talk about. So I guess it's good that I prepared something because apparently I have to do all the work here to come up with content. That didn't even get us through 20 minutes. But I have this rebuild. So back in 2022, I believe, early 2022, my friend, okay, hold on one second. This is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous statement. if Kenneth Walker was good, what kind of ridiculous sentence is this? If Kenneth Walker was good, what a bunch of malarkey. I wish I had the tweet that I saw about Kenneth Walker earlier. Let me see if I can find this. I'm going to see if I can find this tweet that I saw about Kenneth Walker because it was ridiculous. I'm probably not going to be able to find it. But this is a ridiculous claim, and I assume you're just trolling me right now because Kenneth Walker is a very good running back. Okay, how are you going to cite his fantasy finishes and then say you need to go out and buy Garrett Wilson? Go look at Garrett Wilson's fantasy finishes. Sometimes they don't tell the whole story, buddy. Sometimes they don't tell the whole story. Okay. Kenneth Walker had the second worst graded offensive line in the entire NFL this past year. Still scored 16 points per game, by the way, if you take out his injured game. I don't know. I can't find the tweet. He was something like number 1 in the league in missed tackles forced per attempt or something. He's extremely explosive. He's a very good runner. He suffered from terrible line play the whole year. They couldn't block anybody. Now you're going to have Clint Kubiak coming in, much better run game coordinator than Ryan Grubb. The zone concepts that he's going to be running are very fitting. Outside zone concepts are very fitting for Kenneth Walker's strengths. So personally, I think he's going to be just fine. He's a big target for me. I like him a lot. And anyway, regardless of all of this, valuing Derrick Henry above him at any point in time would be stupid. So there you go. Getting off my soapbox now. That's what I wanted to say. Now, back to my rebuild. I joined this orphan team. It was my friend's league. It was a bunch of his friends from Twitter. He's like, join this league with me. And somebody left the league. And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll take it over. No big deal. The first season's paid for, whatever. When I tell you this team was an absolute disaster, this team was like one of the worst teams that I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, this is going to be it. This is going to be a journey. So I took it over in 2022, right after the 2021 season. Took it over in 2022. Let me show you what this team looked like. And you give me a second here to move the camera around because it's being silly right now. So let me fix this. Okay. That was actually pretty easy to do. Okay. So let me show you what this looked like. Here's the rebuild. I pulled screenshots. I went back into the league history. I guess the guy who ran the team before me is getting thrown under the bus here, but oh well. Here's the team. Remember, this is 2022 offseason. We're looking at Matt Ryan, late in his career, right? Colts jersey. Nick Chubb, Melvin Gordon, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, Adam Humphries, Gerald Everett, Emmanuel Sanders, Kyle Rudolph, Latavius Murray, Deshaun Jackson, Jacoby Brissett, Ian Book, Jameis Winston, Kirk Cousins, hey, a real player. Okay. Benny Snell, Chris Carson, pretty sure he was already retired at this point, Dearness Johnson, Derrick Henry, okay, real player, great. Brandon Bolden, Julio Jones, I think this was right after the terrible year on the Titans, so basically dust. Tajay Sharp, Amari Rogers, Robert Tonyan, Will Fuller, post-retirement, Michael Thomas on IR, and then a bunch of nonsense down here as well. So this is terrible, right? This is a terrible roster. You can't see right now. Let me see if I can, let me just move over here. Move down here. Yeah, that'll work. What you can see down here, I don't have my first. So he's got a 2022 second and a lot of thirds, no firsts. So I don't even have my first round pick for the year. I have like 3 players that hold any value. So this is a nightmare scenario. This is about as bad as it gets. And so whenever I talk about like don't ever do a 2-year rebuild. These situations are different. They are outside the norm. This is an outlier. This was like obviously a 2-year rebuild from the jump. But I didn't make this mess. I just came in to clean it up. So I found this cool site. Well, actually, I didn't find it. It was sent to me, but I posted it in the resources tab. It's this site that will let you go into your sleeper league history, and you can literally see every single trade that was made by team for an entire year. And you can go back through the league history, which is pretty cool. So I decided to go back and look at all the trades that I made from the time I took this team over until today. And it was pretty interesting to go through this exercise because I actually did not make as many good trades as I thought I did. And I made a lot of trades that were absolutely garbage, just aged like terrible, rotten milk. And yet I have a very competitive team in this league. 2 years was all it took. And I made the semifinals last year, almost made the finals. I was the 2, I wasn't the 2 seed. I think I was the 3 seed. Yeah, I was the 3 seed. And, yeah, very competitive team now. So it only took 2 years, and I didn't have to like nail every single move that I made. Again, I made a lot of pretty bad moves actually. So let's take a look at this history here. I've marked all these trades here in green and red, depending on whether I clearly won the deal or clearly lost the deal. The ones in white are like somewhat ambiguous, I guess. So looking at 2022 here, this is the first year worth of trades that I made. And I've put the eventual players that were picked with rookie picks in parentheses. I didn't necessarily make all of these picks, but the website does say who those picks turned into. So that's what I'm putting here. So I ended up trading, Kirk Cousins away in my first trade for a 2023 first and second, 2023 first that became the 112, unfortunately. And then a 2022 second that was already the 212. We had a back-to-back champion. So I got these 2 picks here. Ended up being Zach Charbonnet and John Mechie. Okay, whatever. Then I traded away Melvin Gordon and Julio Jones. Remember, these guys were pretty washed at this point. For a couple of third-round picks. Ended up becoming Luke Musgrave and Malachi Corley. Not great. Traded away Nick Chubb, though, for a first, which ended up becoming the 104. And I got Garrett Wilson with that pick. Actually, it was already the 104 because that was the same offseason. So I made that trade like right before the rookie draft. I was able to get Garrett Wilson. Okay, great. Big win for me, right? Huge value difference now between Chubb and Garrett Wilson. I also sent away Derrick Henry, Jalen Tolbert, and a 2023 fourth that ended up becoming Tucker Kraft. That was unfortunate, that the pick ended up being Tucker Kraft. I think I actually got that pick back later, though. And in that deal, I got Jordan Addison, I got a future first in 2023 that eventually became Jordan Addison, and then a third that became Izzy Abanikanda. So you can see, guys, so far, I'm turning players into picks. I've been shedding every single living player with a pulse off my roster for any picks I can get, early or late, doesn't matter. I took James Cook. I actually don't know how I have James Cook. He's not in the screenshots here, so I don't know when I got James Cook. But it says I traded James Cook for a 2024 first. And that eventually that pick became J.J. McCarthy. Again, I'm not sure where he came from. There must have been a trade in between the time I took over and the beginning of the next league year. But either way. Then I made this absolutely terrible trade. I don't know what was going on here. I guess this is when Gabe Davis was viewed highly. Traded Khalil Shakir and Chase Claypool, whatever, and my future third that it became the 301, which crazy enough became Rashee Rice, for Gabe Davis. Yikes. I traded Matt Ryan for the 210. I guess that's a win because Matt Ryan basically went to 0 after that, but the 210, obviously, Roshan Johnson wasn't very impactful for me. I was able to trade Robert Tonyan for 2 fourths somehow, which again became nothing. Eric Gray, Darnell Washington. Traded Michael Thomas, Cooper Rush, and a 5th for Jerry Jeudy. That became a big win. That was pretty much his floor of value. And then I quickly turned around and traded Gabe Davis away with a 3rd for Hollywood Brown, which I guess was probably a win at the time. Still pretty much a win, I guess. Here you can see the wonders of trading in season. I was able to actually get something for Gerald Everett and Deion Jackson. Deion Jackson, I think, started like 1 week for the Colts, but I was able to grab a second, a third, and a fourth for these three jabronis here. And one of those picks became Jaden Reed, so that's cool. And then to close out the 2022 season, my last deal, I sent away Jerry Jeudy and Isaiah Pacheco. This was Pacheco's rookie year, I believe. I guess I was skeptical about him. For a second that became Josh Downs, I got that fourth round pick back that became Tucker Kraft, and I got Greg Dulcich, who I was pretty high on at the time, which is why I made this trade, and it ended up aging pretty poorly for me. I'd say that's actually pretty definitively an L. All right. So far, you can see I've pretty much shed this thing down to the bones, only have picks at this point. So that's why I didn't make quite as many trades in 2023. I ended up finishing this year 1-13, negative 1,219 point differential. So that's pretty good. That's mission accomplished, right? The next year, I went 0-14, negative 1,418 point differential. I locked up the 101 in both classes, which was huge for me. And I went ahead and made my rebuild. And then you can see this year, I went 10-4, positive 488 point differential. In 2023, first deal I made involved trading away the 101. So I sent away Bijan along with Garrett Wilson and Hollywood Brown and that 2023 second. And I got back Jalen Hurts and 2 2024 firsts. So what I did here was I pushed value out into the future because I knew this wasn't my year. So I wanted to re-roll some of that value into future firsts that could potentially be early. And you can see here, one of them ended up being quite early, the 102. One of them ended up being late. But I basically traded, this was a big value win for me, getting all this for Bijan, because I got the best asset in the deal, Jalen Hurts. I get the 102, that's the third best asset. I get the 111, Lad McConkey, ends up being the fourth best asset in this trade. Then I made this other trade during the rookie draft. I traded I traded the 112 to move up to the 105. I traded the 112. I traded a future first that was not my own. And I traded a third, and I traded Deontay Johnson for the 105 to get Jahmyr Gibbs. I was very high on Jahmyr Gibbs. I thought he was going to gain value. And then I also got the 205, which became Marvin Mims. Whatever, Marvin Mims, fine, okay. But Jahmyr Gibbs ended up being a big win for me. Then we go to a pretty head-scratching trade. I'm not sure under what circumstance I traded away a second for A.J. Dillon. I don't know what was going on in the world at that time. I don't know what the reasoning was behind that. I traded a second for A.J. Dillon. I don't know why. Crazy, crazy decision there. Then I go ahead and make a big swing. Not something I would normally do, to go out and buy someone like Lamar Jackson when I'm in the midst of a rebuild. But I thought that I could go out and get him when he was available, not usually a player that's available. I was able to trade my own 2026 first. My thought was I'll be out of the rebuild by then, and I was correct about that. Trade my 2026 first along with the 102, the 2024 pick that became the 102, my own 2024 second that became the 201, along with some late picks and A.J. Dillon, who I had just acquired, to get Lamar Jackson. So it's really, 2 firsts, an early second. That's a good deal to get Lamar. That's why I did it. It was a good deal to get Lamar Jackson. I just went ahead and went for it. Hey, T, what's up? Welcome to the stream. I'm just recapping this big rebuild that I did. Mainly showing how you don't have to nail all your decisions and all your picks in order to successfully rebuild a team. Now, this league does have a special taxi squad poaching rule, which basically says that if you have a player on your taxi squad, another team can poach that player by trading, can force you to bring that player up to your active roster by threatening to poach the player. And to poach the player means they have to give you a rookie pick that is 1 round better than the pick you spent. In other words, Marvin Mims was poached off of my roster for the cost of a 2024 first, which was an insane decision. I don't know why this person did that. Marvin Mims wasn't even having that good of a season. But whatever, I got traded a first that became Brian Thomas. That was a huge break for me, obviously, trading Marvin Mims for Brian Thomas. Humongous, humongous win. So at this point, you can see in the rebuild, I've got multiple future firsts. At this time, it's 2023. I have at least 3 2024 firsts. I have my own, and then I have these other 2 that end up being late. I have Lamar Jackson. I have Jalen Hurts, right? Now, here's what happened. I think I talked about this in a video. It's a head-to-head league. In other words, the draft order is determined first by win-loss record. I was set to play the other team in the league that was tanking, and we were tanking for Caleb, and I regret this, but I thought it was so important. I thought it was so important for me to get the 101 that I thought I had to do whatever it took to lose that matchup. And so what I ended up doing was trading away Hurts and Lamar so that I would have 0 real players that I could start against this other team. So I traded Jalen Hurts for Anthony Richardson, a 2025 first and a 2025 second. At this time, Richardson was hurt. And he was going to come back next year. His value was good. So in a sense, this was fine on a value basis, because if you remember the following offseason, Hurts is like the 4th or 5th overall pick in startups. Richardson was like the 11th overall pick. At that point in time, this was a fine trade because I picked up an extra first and second. The issue is that I held on to Richardson for too long, and then I ended up losing the trade. Now, trading Lamar for Kyler, Josh Downs in a third, that's just a clear L on my part. Didn't go well for me. My thought was there wasn't as huge a gap between Lamar and Kyler at the time. That ended up being incorrect. And then this final trade was pretty brutal. I traded Devon Achane straight up for Mark Andrews. I don't remember exactly why I did this. I was very high on Andrews. I guess it was before. No, it wasn't before he got hurt. It was after he had gotten hurt. And I guess I thought Achane was more of a flash in the pan. He had that very efficient rookie season, but he had also picked up multiple injuries. He hadn't really sustained a large workload for a long period of time. So I wasn't as convinced about the breakout of Devon Achane. So these 3 trades have all aged pretty poorly for me, right? And that's a bummer. But it hasn't precluded me from having a competitive team. So I go into the 2023 offseason, or the 2024 offseason, I guess, with the 101 in hand. I'm going to lock up Caleb Williams. I've got some other firsts as well. I end up getting really fortunate with my end of the first round picks. I get Ladd McConkey, I get Brian Thomas. That's great. You can see here where I made other deals. So I went ahead and traded the 106 while I was on the clock for Drake London. Now I could have taken Brock Bowers there. So although this says JJ McCarthy, the next pick was Brock Bowers. And I'm pretty upset I didn't just take Bowers instead of trading the pick for London. But I can't be too mad about getting Drake London for the price of a mid first. That was a good thought process. Then I made the trade that ended up being the absolute linchpin of my playoff run last year, which is this team that immediately got like super cold feet about competing and wanted to rebuild. And they wanted their first round pick back. And this is why you trade for people's first round picks, because they make really questionable decisions. So this team decided they wanted to rebuild. I had his first and I had his second, and I held it over his head. And he ended up trading me Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Mike Evans to get his first and second round pick back. Now, mind you, at this time, right, we didn't know what Saquon Barkley was going to do. We didn't know what Derrick Henry was going to do. These guys were still creeping up in value after landing in good landing spots. Obviously, in hindsight, it looks ridiculous. But if this guy had rebuilt properly and he had at least gotten the 101 out of it, and he had Ashton Genty and the 201, I think he'd feel a lot better. I don't understand why he didn't, but he kind of half-assed it, and he ended up with the 104 and the 204. So this looks absolutely ridiculous for him now. Then I had a streak of really awful trades. I traded Josh Downs for Deontay Johnson. I was very high on Deontay on the Panthers. That ended up being like partially correct. It's just that Josh Downs ended up breaking out even more than I expected, and Deontay Johnson like disappeared off the face of the earth. In September, we had the Jordan Mason emergence after Christian McCaffrey went down, and I didn't think Sam Darnold was going to be so insane. I was like, I don't need a quarterback because I already had Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray and Caleb Williams. I was like, Sam Darnold's just going to rot on my bench. He's going to be a temporary fill-in guy. There's no way he's a long-term quarterback. Let me trade for Jordan Mason, who I can start right now. That was stupid. Didn't work out for me at all, obviously. I traded 2 solidly valuable players, guys that are worth like early seconds at best, at worst, for guys that are worth basically nothing, right? That sucks. And then this was just really bad timing. This was right before Drake London kind of had his little breakout, before Ladd McConkey kind of had his breakout, and before Rashee Rice got hurt. At this point in time, Rashee Rice was like top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. Drake London was like kind of whatever. And then Ladd McConkey was still a rookie. We didn't really know what we had. So I made this trade that was terrible. Drake London, Ladd McConkey, Mark Andrews for Rashee Rice and Dalton Kincaid. My thought here was, let me consolidate some value into a superstar player in Rashee Rice. I have the surplus value to do this. It aged so poorly, right? Rashee Rice gets hurt that very same week, and I'm immediately regretting this. I think Drake London also had a huge game. I think that might have been the week he played the Chiefs. Huge game. Yeah, absolutely painful. Total bummer, right? Didn't matter. I still competed. I still got 3rd place. I traded Jalen Polk for a 2027 second because I could see that guy wasn't going anywhere. And then realizing that I had made a humongous mistake trading away Ladd McConkey, I went back and I rectified that mistake. I traded Kincaid back to the same manager. I said, get this Kincaid guy off my team. He needed a fill-in quarterback too. So I said, take Jameis, take a 2025 second, take a 2027 second, take all this garbage. Give me Ladd McConkey back, and then give me David Njoku. So I was able to save it. I was able to salvage some of the damage there and get Ladd back on my team, which is huge for me. Then we get the Richardson benching, and I'm pretty much ready to get off the train with him. And I needed to make sure I had a quarterback. I wanted to have a backup quarterback in my pocket for the playoffs. So I traded Richardson for Geno. Obviously, that hasn't aged super well just because Geno's lost some value. Richardson has also lost some value, but he's solidly valued ahead of Geno. I didn't really know if he was going to get a starting job back at all. It was very touch and go. So whatever. I don't really care about that trade too much. Getting towards the end of the season, I started maneuvering a little bit more. I traded away Caleb Williams and my 2025 first and Tank Bigsby to get Drake May, Kyron Williams, and a couple of 3rds. I figured I'd rather start May than Caleb anyway. Kyron, I would value ahead of a playoff first at that time. I still do value him ahead of the 110. I didn't really care much about Bigsby. I got those 2/3. I liked this deal. I still like this deal. May being valued ahead of Caleb or about the same as Caleb. I think this looks good for me. And then I went ahead and traded Kyron like 2 weeks later to get Chase Brown plus. I got Chase Brown and the 206. I just kind of decided like Chase Brown's probably going to outscore Kyron the rest of the year about the same. I think they're going to have similar types of job security. The market does value Kyron ahead, but I'm fine with this. The fact that I got the second on top. And then I got a little bit greedy, I think. I mean, the value here is not terrible, but I got a little bit greedy making what you call a win now trade, which obviously you should never do. Win now trades are stupid, but I'm stupid sometimes. I make stupid trades. I'm a human being. So I wanted George Kittle from a team that had gotten eliminated from the playoffs because I was rocking Tucker Kraft at the time. I wanted George Kittle. I wanted that elite upside. So I traded Kraft. I traded Shaheed. I traded Dobbs. I traded some spare picks. I traded that second. I had just gotten a 3rd, a 4th in 2027. And I got George Kittle and Cooper Kupp. I lost this trade on value, like no doubt. I don't think it's that bad just because so many of these pieces are just like filler. But if I could trade that filler for late round picks and take shots on rookies, that would be great, right? Instead, I have the rotting corpse of Cooper Kupp. So, it is what it is. I did manage to make one trade for the future. This is a no trade deadline league. So the last trade I made for the year was after I got eliminated. I turned right around and traded with the team in the finals, which is what you should do in a no deadline league. I think you should have deadlines, but if you don't have a deadline, what you should do if you get eliminated from the playoffs is you should go flip some of that depreciating value onto another team. I traded Derrick Henry and George Kittle away for Bucky Irving and a 2026 second. I said, give me the young guy, give me the pick. You take the old guys. You go win the championship. That's fine. I don't care. I don't want these guys on my team in the offseason. And I do think that has aged pretty well. So that's where it sits. Now, here's what the team looks like now. Okay. It's absolutely not a super team, but I think it's solidly a contender. We've got Kyler and May, along with Geno Smith as my 3 quarterbacks. My running back room is the star of the show here with Bucky, Saquon, Chase Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs. I have Ladd McConkey and Brian Thomas at wide receiver, along with some old guys in Mike Evans and Cooper Kupp. Also have Rashee Rice here on the bench, which is nice. And then I've got Njoku sitting here at tight end without much else. And then you can see the bench is mostly nothing, right? Got Marshawn Lloyd, maybe he's interesting. Jordan Mason, maybe he's a handcuff. Deontay Johnson, maybe he's not dead. Otherwise, mostly zeros. I don't have much by way of 2025 picks, just a few picks in the late rounds. I don't have my first because I traded it a couple years ago for Lamar Jackson. So I'm going to have to do some maneuvering here to keep this team high value. Probably going to go ahead and try to flip Kupp for whatever I can get. Probably going to have to tear down from one of these running backs, maybe flip Barkley while he's still at his peak. We'll see. I'll figure something out. But you can see here from where we started, right? 2 years ago. Well, technically 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago. I tanked 2 seasons, and then I was able to compete. And I was a legit championship contender after that 2-year rebuild, despite starting with basically nothing to work with. And so that's my final point here to close out this massive recap. Thank you for hanging out and sticking through that. Is it's never as bad as you think, right? No matter how bad it looks, even if you've absolutely totally mismanaged your team, there's almost no chance that you are more than 2 years away from being a legit contender. Like, you don't have to do that much. Just the sheer ability to appreciate value through rookie picks, unless you're completely mismanaging, I think that's pretty huge. I think that's a pretty huge thing to keep in mind. T says, I think Barkley feels overvalued for a running back older than CMC that has a similar floor ceiling. He's not older than CMC. He just turned 28 in February on the Super Bowl. CMC will be 29 in July. So he's a year younger, or about a year younger than McCaffrey. But yes, I agree. He is overvalued. I mean, he's going in the late second round of startups. That's the same thing we saw happen with McCaffrey last year. It's definitely a mistake. And I'm going to take all my Barkley shares and I'm going to shop around and see what I can get, because the truth is he probably isn't going to maintain what he did last year. He was living off of these humongous plays. He wasn't catching passes. He still has to deal with Hurts at the goal line. I think he is going to be a sell for me. And I just have to go and see, what kind of deals can get done. But he was the overall RB1, but it's important to remember he was one of the lower scoring overall RB1s. It was more like the Jonathan Taylor year when he was RB1 than it was for any of the legendary Christian McCaffrey seasons. He wasn't touching those Christian McCaffrey seasons. So he's not like this locked and loaded guy who's going to win you your league. He very much is in the mix for RB1, but he's not a necessarily like a legendary upside type of running back. So probably a sell. I mean, I love the guy. He's one of my absolute favorite players in the NFL. And so I'm emotionally attached to him, but that's not how I play Dynasty. I'm going to go ahead and look around and see what I can do. But I appreciate you guys calling me inspirational. Thank you. I do try to be an inspiration. Obviously, my Dynasty accomplishments certainly speak for themselves. I wear that 3rd place finish with honor. Yeah, flipping for Bucky. Flipping for London is definitely a solid idea. Try to get Bucky plus. I think you can get a decent plus on top of Bucky. I would be asking for that plus. And high first. Yeah, I mean, the domain guys were saying take 102 over Barkley. I think that's reasonable. I do have Saquon ranked ahead of 102. I need to revisit where I have him ranked. Honestly, I think I'm factoring in the market a little bit too much there. I probably need to move him down a little bit. But yeah, high first. See what you can add to Barkley to get the 101, right? That seems like a pretty fun idea. Yellow Dog says, I've been reading a lot about Genty over Bijan. Did I ask you about this? You didn't ask me about it. I don't know if you mean as a prospect or as a dynasty asset, but I would disagree with both. I would say Bijan was slightly better prospect, and I would say Bijan is still slightly more valuable in dynasty. Just, I think there's a lot of security with him where you know what you're getting, and I don't have any reason to believe that Genty has higher upside. So really what you're getting with Genty is he's a couple of years younger. I don't know if that trade-off is worthwhile, but I think they're super close, and I could definitely see Genty jumping him early in the season. If he does get that good landing spot and then he comes out and has a strong start, you're not going to really be able to justify keeping him under Bijan because he's younger. But I do think there's enough uncertainty between the two of them that I would just rather have Bijan right now. All right, guys, that's going to do it. Don't worry about my face being over here. There we go. Yeah, so we're going to wrap things up here, guys, with that last little discussion there on Genty. I don't think he's a better prospect than Bijan. I think they're in the same realm. Honestly, I'm not the best person to ask because I don't have like these buckets. You know, I don't have a linear regression model. I'm not JJ Zacharyson. I'm a lot looser with my process. I put guys, you know, I kind of bucket them together and like see them as archetypes, and I'd say they're similar. But Bijan, I think, was more complete. You know, Genty had the receiving kind of fall off for him late in his last season. He also faced worse competition than Bijan did. So I think those are some factors that matter as well. But it is splitting hairs a little bit. Oh, yeah, you guys are asking about the website. So it is... if you go into the Discord, it's the most recent thing that I posted in the resources channel, but it's called fantasyamp.com/streamlit. But yeah, I'll just copy paste the link and I'll put it in the member stream channel. So you have to make an account, and you'll have to like verify your email with an account, but then you can put in your sleeper username, click on any league you want, and then you can click on the year and it will load in the trades. You just have to give it a minute. It'll load in all the trades and you'll be able to see who made those deals. That was on Sheets. I was showing you a Google sheet, but I had manually typed all the trades in from this website that let me actually find the trade history. So the reason that I had all the trades was because I went over to this fantasyamp.com and I actually went and looked at each individual season and I pulled those trades out, and then I put them in the sheet myself so that you could look at them because I'm very kind. So anyway, that's going to be it, guys. You guys, can you restart the stream? You can restart the stream in just a second because I'm going to leave. Appreciate you guys coming in and hanging out with me and asking me questions, talking Dynasty with me. Always a highlight of the week. I will talk to you all in the Discord, and I will see you again real soon. Have a good night.